Hi, welcome to Pegasus Research, Substack Week in Review, Unscripted number 32 podcast. I'm Thomas, the founder of and the author for Pegasus Research. I'm an economist, a military historian, and a U.S. Army veteran. If you like my content and want to support my work, please consider becoming a subscriber or a follower on Substack. Or if you want to provide one-time financial support, you can go to Patreon or buy me a coffee. The websites will be in the description section of this podcast. So thank you. Welcome all my prior listeners and subscribers. Welcome, and thank you for continuing to support my work. All my new subscribers and followers, welcome. I appreciate you joining in. This is a weekly podcast released on Saturday evenings, and it covers the 3 articles that I wrote this week, which are typically released on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with audio and video versions released on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And this is just my extemporaneous thoughts of the papers that I wrote this week, maybe covering some things that I didn't have time to cover in the paper, and maybe expand on some of my thoughts as well. So the 3 papers this week was the USS Eisenhower almost struck by Houthi missile, the West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 19, and When Whistling Past the Graveyard Meets the Gloomy Science, Part 1. All right, so was the USS Eisenhower almost struck by the Houthi missiles? Now, the USS Eisenhower has not been in the region for over 6 weeks, meaning in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea area. It left about 6 weeks ago. If you remember, this was the carrier that the Houthis claimed that they sunk. So this is not a news story, but what was released this week was a paper, I think it was at West Point, where it had confirmed that a missile from the Houthis came within 200 meters or 219 yards from the USS Eisenhower. I keep wanting to say Enterprise. So this was not released by the Navy until this week. So kind of give you a little bit of a background on this is the Iran-backed Houthi rebels have an anti-ship campaign in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea, where they have been attacking international shipping in the region. Originally, they said they were going to attack ships that were destined for Israel or Israeli flagged, but now they basically just attack everything, and they give usually some tangential, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon type connections that they are connected to Israel to justify their attacks on all shipping in the region, or as many ships as they can attack. I think they've sunk at least 2. I think they've killed 4 people. And it has caused a significant interdiction in shipping, as a lot of ships are no longer going through the Red Sea into the Suez Canal, or from the Suez Canal down the Red Sea. Instead they are going all the way around the Horn of Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, whether going to Asia or coming from Asia to Europe and North America. So it has had a pretty significant campaign. So the U.S. Navy, along with the Royal Navy and the French Navy, and a couple, I think the Italian Navy is involved too, and a few other navies around the world, have started trying to stop the Houthi attacks, either through attacking the Houthi rebel sites that are launching the missiles, or just trying to protect shipping by shooting down missiles that are inbound into merchant shipping. But you cannot disguise the fact that the campaign has been relatively successful for a non-government actor who is obviously being supported by Iran. So the Houthi rebels, to give a little bit of history, is in Yemen. They are supported by Iran. They fought a proxy war with the Saudi Arabians when the Saudis just stopped because rebel attacks on their oil fields. They basically reached a de facto peace agreement with the Houthis. But on the October 7th attack on Gaza by Hamas, the Houthis pledged their support to Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran in their proxy wars against Israel. And so, again, it's joined into these attacks. Again, first to sit there saying they're trying to stop shipping into Israel and basically have gone after everything using the laws of the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So, this campaign has been mainly focused on the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and to a lesser extent, the Arabian Sea. It is causing significant disruption to international shipping, as I stated. I'll go look here at my notes. As the ongoing attacks have disrupted 12% of all international shipping passing through the Red Sea. So that means that 12% of all international trade passes through this region. And this also includes oil. And so this is a significant threat to the world economy, not only commerce, but the flow of oil. And this also impacts China. Even though the Houthis have tried to steer clear of upsetting the Chinese, because they know that Chinese are a little bit more, are not part of the Western order and not a supporter of Israel, they have attacked Chinese shipping. And just the fact that Chinese ships have to make the longer course around the Cape of Good Hope, this is also impacting China, which is, again, a big part of international trade. So the U.S. Navy has deployed warships to protect, again, commercial shippings and to also attack targets, Houthi locations responsible for the attacks. U.S. Navy is not the only one. There's other countries have been involved and have been coordinating, including the French, the United Kingdom, and Israel have all participated in attacking Houthi sites. So the USS Eisenhower, along with its carrier strike group, has operated with the mission to suppress Houthi rebels and activities in the spring and summer of 2024. I wrote in this paper that part of the traditional U.S. Navy's doctrine is the Navy helps keep international trade open. So the Captain Mahan, he was a naval philosopher that, in fact, had a significant amount of influence on the modern U.S. Navy, or the development of the role of the modern U.S. Navy and of the Royal Navy. And part of it is because these are U.S. and United Kingdom are ocean-going nations with a significant trade. The U.S. Navy was there to secure the shipping routes. So, part of the Navy's job as in the world is to maintain shipping lanes open to the U.S. and its allies. Other countries tangentially benefit from the role of the U.S. Navy in this, but again, the primary role is to protect U.S. and its allies' commerce. So I kind of make that point is it's not surprising that the U.S. Navy would be involved. Also, you're talking about flow of oil coming out of the Persian Gulf. That goes back to some of the reflexes of the Carter Doctrine and protecting the flow of oil outside the Persian Gulf for the U.S. and its allies. So the U.S. sent the Eisenhower Strike Group to suppress the activities of the Houthi rebels. So in this whole episode, the Eisenhower by the Houthis was, and its ships were, not only were merchant ships that the U.S. Navy was protecting the region were being attacked, they were actually, the Houthis were also directing attacks towards the U.S. Navy. And this included the Eisenhower. So during I think if I remember right, is the U.S. Carrier Strike Group had launched 155 anti-air missiles to shoot down cruise missiles and ballistic missiles at incoming Houthi weapons against the Carrier Strike Group or areas that it was protecting or ships that it was protecting. This is the most attacks on a U.S. carrier group since World War II. This is the most activity that a U.S. carrier has suffered. Again, I can't say suffered because it suffered no injuries and no damage, but it is the most that a carrier has been attacked since World War II. So during one of these attacks, the Houthis reported that the Eisenhower had been hit, severely damaged, and most likely sunk. Now, the Houthis have been in a public relations battle and using strategic communications for its allies to kind of get its message out first. And this is a case where the U.S. did not respond quickly or effectively to the response of the Houthis. Now, part of that is security because you don't want to give away the area of the Eisenhower. But the U.S. silence was viewed by many of the supporters of the Houthis as confirming the damage to the Eisenhower. Now, when the Eisenhower went to left the area on because it could only stay so long, it left the area to be replaced. I think by the Truman eventually, but I'm not 100% sure on that. When it left the area, it went up the Red Sea and docked at Crete. And though prior to arriving in Crete, the U.S. Navy had denied that the Eisenhower was sunk or hit or anything like that. And when it finally showed up at Crete, it was obvious that there was no damage. It was obviously not sunk, but the rumor had already basically been circling the world, especially again on the allies of Iran and the Houthis. So kind of the public relations benefit probably went to the Houthis over the U.S. Navy. Now, what did come out of this, and this is probably where there's a little bit of smoke, there's some fire. A Houthi missile had come in, as was described by this magazine that was released at West Point this week. Again, this is not a new article, not a new issue, or not a new something that just happened. Eisenhower's been out of the area for about 6 weeks. They did a magazine released in West Point said that a Houthi missile had, quote, come in low over the horizon towards the Eisenhower and was not detected. And it was skimming close to the water, and it crashed into the sea about 200 meters from, or 219 yards from the Eisenhower. And that missile had never been engaged by the carrier or its battle group. And so, not sure what the size of the missile is. Probably not going to sink a super carrier. They don't have that size of weapons, and those carriers are just massive. But it could have damaged the Eisenhower, and it was not detected. So, a couple of things from this is that the U.S. Navy should learn is that missiles pose a real threat, because when they look at the U.S. Navy's considering what they have to do in the Western Pacific against China, there is concerns that China is building what they call aircraft killing missiles, and along with their other missiles, U.S. Navy has to be able to know how to operate or learn appropriately operate in a missile environment. So the U.S. Navy put the Eisenhower in an area that it was subjected to missile attacks. And I think it was about 150, 155 attacks, or it required 155 missiles to ward off attacks on the Eisenhower and its carrier strike group and ships that it was protecting. So again, it's a significant number. So what happened when you put the Eisenhower in a region, again, in the Gulf of Aden, in the Red Sea, and maybe some of the Arabian Sea, you're putting the Eisenhower and its carrier group into a box. And so that's an area where it has limited ability, where a carrier has advantages when it can have a little bit more freedom of movement. But it was kind of moved to the point where I don't know exactly all the maneuvering, but what they did do is they put the Eisenhower in a designated area that the Houthis could figure out roughly where it was at to shoot missiles at it. Again, a lot of them are inaccurate. Obviously, the U.S. Navy protects the Eisenhower, but they did put the Eisenhower and its carrier strike group in danger. in an area of not being able to use the space, the full advantage of the space of the ocean, to put it in an area to be attacked multiple times by missiles. Again, fortunately, I always want to make it clear it was never hit, but they were gambling that it wouldn't get hit. And in this case, a Houthi missile got very close to hitting the Eisenhower. So again, this is something that they're going to have to deal with talking about the Western Pacific, and they've talked about the U.S. Navy and the Defense Department, how they would handle approaching the missiles, and how they would work through the Chinese threat. And it seems like they have some understanding of what that needs to do. But the fact that they put, despite their idea of what missile defenses that have to do with dealing with a Chinese threat, they wouldn't put the Eisenhower in the danger of Houthi missiles, which are coming from Iran. So they put the Eisenhower in a geographic location and left it in that relatively small geographic location, and so subjected to multiple attacks. So the fact is right now is that the Eisenhower or any of the U.S. carriers, and we'll talk about it in one of my papers coming up, these carriers take a long time to build, and it's a high value asset, and there's only 11 of them right now. And the putting a carrier into a region and not using overwhelming force to stop a missile, because again, the Houthis are launching missiles. They've proven that they can hit ships, whether through missiles, use of helicopters, automated speedboats to attack ships. The Houthis have shown themselves capable of it. So obviously, and these ships they're attacking are large ships, and some of them are larger than the Eisenhower. Again, probably not as well protected and not as well designed as the Eisenhower, but it could pose a serious threat. So what they did is they put the Eisenhower into a limited geographic location, subjected it to missile attacks, and they had no real plan to suppress or destroy the Houthis' ability to launch the missiles. So they just went in there, they placed the Eisenhower there and its carrier strike group, hoping that nothing would happen. And it came close to something, it was close to something happening. So the U.S. Navy got lucky. And so my point is that this is a high value asset, the carrier, and it's even its warships, but the carrier obviously is a high value target. They put it in harm's way, and they didn't really have, meaning the U.S., the Department of Defense, did not have a sufficient plan to take down the missile defenses or the missiles and what the attacking missiles. They launched air attacks. They launched air-to-ground missiles. They launched missiles from surface-to-surface missiles from warship to locations in the Houthi rebels area. They even launched, and this was after the paper, a B-2 bomber strike against targets that they think were storing Houthi missiles and other ammunition that was given to them by Iran. I really think a B-2 strike is overkill against the Houthi rebels, so I suspect that was probably something to show Iran that the U.S. could attack bunkers. Without attacking Iran itself, they attacked a proxy going after bunkers. This is all well and good, but it doesn't really address the whole question. Is the U.S. is not talking about using overwhelming force. Okay, you launch 300 air-to-surface or surface-to-surface missile attacks against the Houthis. They're still shooting at you because you still have to shoot 155 air defense missiles back out against incoming objects from the Houthis. So obviously you're not using overwhelming force. And using B-2 bombers, again, is a example of, again, I think it was a political message to Iranians and less towards suppressing Houthi activities, but they attacked storage locations. Now, that does serve a purpose, but all it is the Iranians will just have to ship the stuff right across the Persian Gulf back to Yemen, and they can rearm and resupply. As long as you're not attacking Iran, the Houthis will continue to receive supplies. So the U.S. doesn't have a serious plan to deal with the Houthi rebels, because if they were really serious, the airstrikes should not have gone so much against the missile batteries, though there are some value in it. It's also you need to attack the port facilities. And if you don't want to start a war with Iran, and I'm not advocating starting a war with Iran, but you need to cut off their supplies to Iran. Iran cannot ship missiles over land across Saudi Arabia. That's their arch rival, so that has to go by sea. And these are not something you can just you can't take a cruise missile and just drop it off a beach from a speedboat. You need port facilities. And so the U.S. Navy should have attacked, if they were serious, they should have attacked those port facilities. If you're going to put the Eisenhower in harm's way, you have it come and deliver a heavy punch to the Houthis on an ongoing basis. Again, attacking those bunkers, attacking those missile sites, attacking the oil facilities, and also attacking the port facilities so that you dry up the support coming from Iran. The Houthis aren't creating these missiles themselves. It's coming from Iran. And again, if you don't want to attack Iran, which I'm not advocating for, you need to cut off the supply line. And you know what the supply line is. It's overseas. Okay? So it's like, so the U.S. had no serious intent. They had no serious plan for actually dealing with the Houthis. It was a half measure. Let's go ahead and destroy some launchers, kill some Houthi rebels, and then next night they're just going to put them right back up and start firing again. And the proof is in the pudding. That's what they were doing. So they were putting the Eisenhower in danger in a small geographic area, just allowed to be shot at without taking any serious attempt to destroy the Houthis' ability to attack the Eisenhower or to attack shipping in the area, which is why the Eisenhower was there in the first place. It was really a half-hearted, excuse my language, half-assed mission. You could go into talk about the Powell Doctrine, which is former Army chief. Actually, it was the commander or the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was a big proponent of overwhelming force. If you're going to commit U.S. forces, you do it overwhelmingly. And the U.S. did not do that. I don't know if it's the case of the administration concerned about escalating with Iran, but it did not make any sense that they risked a carrier just to be shot at continuously, hoping that nothing would happen to it. Luckily, nothing didn't. But again, 200 meters away, came close. Now, the idea is, again, if you're going to commit a carrier, they should have looked at, if they were serious, and that's one of my suggestions, but there's Marine experts out there that are much better adapted to this than I am. But if you want to use the theory of overwhelming force, if you want to go into the Victor Davis Hanson point of battles of annihilation, you go in there and if you're going to risk a carrier, you need to come out with a high reward. You have to succeed. So they need to attack the port facilities. They also need to think about sending in an MEU, or not really, MEU is huge, but an AARG along with the Eisenhower to basically send in Marines to destroy targets. This is not nation building. This is an invasion. This is probably, for a lack of a better term, search and destroy. You go in there and you destroy targets that the air war can't do. If you have to, for lack of a better term, you kill rebels. You destroy their equipment, and you can do it from the ground much more effectively than you can from the air if you want to limit civilian casualties. So they chose not to do this. And again, this isn't suggesting that the U.S. is going in there to occupy Yemen. No, it's a short, sharp strike, destroy as much of their equipment as they have, pull them back out. And if you need to go back and serve it up again, You reland the Marines, they do the same thing over, much like call it the halls of Montezuma in the Marine Corps theme or theme service. So it just, and that's part of their history. So it's like, again, they don't have to occupy territory, but use the Marines in the striking capability to destroy targets, along with the Eisenhower attacking port facilities, or even you land the Marines and they destroy the port facilities. And the Marines can land on the beaches. They don't need ports to land in. So it's, again, this is just an example of what they could have done, but what they did instead is they went into half measures that didn't truly suppress the Houthis' attacks. When the Eisenhower left, the Houthis were still attacking. So again, there's no U.S. casualties in this, but they spent a lot of money in there, and they have not actually accomplished any goals. So again, you risked a target of the value of the Eisenhower, and you got no reward out of it. It was an unnecessary risk. An example of that political leaders should consider the consequences of sending a carrier, a high value target, on a mission in a geographically limited area, subjecting it to repeated attacks without having the political will to escalate the force needed to end the threat. If you're going to sit there and put the Eisenhower in a geographically limited area and subjecting it to attacks, you need to make sure that it's going to deliver the force to end the threat. And they didn't do it, and they risked an aircraft carrier to do it. And it was unnecessary risk if they weren't meaning to actually take down the Houthi rebels. So those are my thoughts about it. Again, it was the U.S. Navy trying to serve its traditional role for the U.S. Economy and the world economy. It did show some success, so it's not a complete failure. This is not a failure of the U.S. Navy. This is a failure of leadership. It was a risky, or maybe they just assumed that there's no way these rebels could get anywhere close to the Eisenhower. That's a big risk to take, especially in this environment. And again, when you're putting it in a geographically limited location. All right, so those are my thoughts about it. I, again, think it's completely unnecessary risk. And this, again, is not a criticism of the U.S. Navy. It is a criticism of the political leadership to not go in with overwhelming force and just risk an aircraft carrier. All right, the West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 19. It, again, has been a relatively quiet week in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, as China has exerted exemplary self-control by not shooting water cannons, ramming ships, beating fishermen. So good job, China. Way to show some self-restraint. That does not mean that it was a quiet week. So again, it was much more of some jockeying in the international arena. Again, this is still coming off relatively close to the ending of the East Asia ASEAN conference. And the Chinese did launch that exercise around Taiwan, a provocative exercise to test blockading and basically as a blockade of the island, where they deployed both Navy and, interestingly, Coast Guard. I wrote a paper about that as a way China could act on the Taiwan without using the Navy, but you make it a law enforcement activity and make it much harder for the West to respond. So I wrote that. I don't remember the name of the paper, but take a look at my Substack article. There's a lot of them. You could take a look, find out about that. I thought it was a good paper. So again, it's been relatively quiet for the Philippine side. I can't say the same for the Taiwanese side. Again, nobody was rammed, nobody was hurt in the Philippines. It was just in the Taiwan. It was just an exercise. But the Philippines did launch or commence the Sama-Sama 2024 exercise. It was with the Philippines, the United States, Japan, and Canada, and it focused on three military areas, which is anti-submarine, anti-surface, surface, and anti-air warfare. And they're working on interoperability between the Philippines and its allies in the region. The United States and Japan and Philippines regularly conduct exercises. This is a relatively new one for Canada, which actually does have a frigate in the area and actually participated with the United States to sail down the Taiwan Straits in defiance of China. So the Canadians put in an effort there, and angered the Chinese in return. So definitely worthy news there, but not impacting the West Philippine Sea. But that happened after the Sama 2024 exercise concluded. The other area that the exercise covered was probably more relevant to what's going on, at least on the peace. There's not a shooting war in the West Philippine Sea, is what's called maritime domain awareness. And this is where kind of what it says is getting an idea of what maritime activities are going on within a specified area. So this means that the Philippines are working with its allies to help, again, the interoperability to allow the Philippines to know where the Chinese, in this case, are activating, or any country, are transiting within the West Philippine Sea. It's also, so the allies can feed information back to the Philippines so they know how to use their comparatively limited resources when compared to China to help promote their claims in their exclusive economic zone. And it works the other way around, is that the Philippines can feed information back to the United States and Japan and other allies to make that the Philippines make them aware of what activities are going on within the West Philippine Sea, which could, again, be relevant if there's some type of conflict in the Korean Peninsula or in Taiwan. This is something that's very relevant to those countries as well. But again, I think it really was the main part of the exercise is so that in this case, the Philippines could work with other countries to help communicate the maritime assets from China, for the most part, that are operating within the West Philippine Sea. Again, and the idea that this will help the Philippines how to use their resources to the utmost extent. So that was a big part of the exercise. Again, it was a relatively short exercise, and it only involved, I think, a total of 5 ships, 3 of them from the Philippines, 1 from the United States, 1 from Canada, and then Japan provided 2 types of aircraft involved in the exercise. So not a very large exercise, but the biggest part, in my opinion, again, was the maritime domain awareness. This will be of most use to the Philippines as they continue to work with their allies. So there was the ASEAN summit had occurred earlier this month, so it's been over. But more questions were coming out of the ASEAN summit, which was also combined with the East Asia summit, which I think it was the East Asia summit chaired by the ASEAN, or chaired by ASEAN. And it's because these countries operate, or these 2 organizations operate in relatively the same area, and it was the best way to be able to get the most amount of leaders to attend both conferences. So that's why the East Asia and ASEAN conference get mixed together. But ASEAN committed to negotiating a code of conduct for the South China Sea between ASEAN nations and China. Now, China is not part of ASEAN. The Philippines are, along with Vietnam, which are the ones that have the most issues right now with China in their respective exclusive economic zones. This idea of a code of conduct, the island building that China has done is not new. The aggressiveness that China is showing towards the Philippines is relatively new, but this is not an issue that has been top of the agenda, but something ASEAN had been talking about negotiating since I think 2007. I think was when they first brought up the concept. It was really pressed over the last year in 2023. The agreement coming out of the ASEAN summit was that they would spend 2024 and 2025 negotiating with China to reach some type of consensus, and then the code of conduct would be in place by 2026. And the idea is this is to help prevent any clashes or incidences in the South China Sea that could lead to some type of war. So this was an attempt by ASEAN, and the Philippines President Marcos of the Philippines has been very much pushing to get this in place. Now, talking about the Philippine president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., he did express dissatisfaction at the summit that they can't even agree on the most mundane definitions, they mean ASEAN and China, on what is an aggressive act, for example. Seems like something pretty easy to define, which tells me that China does have allies in ASEAN, are probably trying to water it down as much as they can. So just an example, can't even agree on what is an aggressive act. President Marcos basically has questioned the feasibility of the 2026 goal. And I think he's right there. I don't think China really has an interest in this goal. I'll discuss that later, or just here in a moment. So the Philippine Defense Minister, Gilberto Teodoro, expressed doubts as well about the feasibility of a code of conduct, citing China's lack of willingness to negotiate in good faith on matters of international law. And so that's kind of the point I was just bringing up earlier, is what Defense Minister Teodoro stated. It doesn't look like China's really serious. And in fact, that you can't even agree on a simple term of what is an aggressive act tells me that China is basically just going along, saving face, but not really serious about it. And the reason why they do this is if China agrees to some form of code of conduct, China's position is that the South China Sea and the 9-dash line is their sovereign territory, and everybody else is a trespasser. So China's not saying that they'll cut off the region, the South China Sea, because a large part of international commerce comes through it. China's not talking about cutting off commerce in the region, but they allow commerce out of, let's just say it, out of the goodness of their own heart, because they're saying that this is their territory, and anybody that operates in that territory is violating China's sovereignty if they don't ask permission to be there. Never mind, we talked about briefly about the rules-based order. So this is just one of those cases where the rules-based order that most of the world follows in international commerce, China does not recognize. So China claims this is, again, contrary to international law. China claims the South China Sea is their own based on some historic reference point, and that this is their territory, and everybody else is trespassing unless they ask permission of China. Now, if China signs a ASEAN Code of Conduct, that basically negates their claims that this is their territory, because if it's truly their territory and their sovereign territory, they do not need to negotiate a code of conduct in there. So if they agree to it, they basically negate what their whole point is when they state that this is their sovereign territory. So you don't negotiate an agreement of how to act within your sovereign territory if it's, again, not really your sovereign territory. So if China agrees to this, to a code of conduct in the way that it's trying to be directed and recognizing in this case, the Philippines exclusive economic zone, that means that you're recognizing international law, which again is contrary to what China is stating, which means that their statements about the South China Sea and it being sovereign territory fall apart. So the Chinese are never going to agree to this code of conduct, or it will be so watered down that it will actually mean nothing, because China, again, is not going to give up their claims over the sovereign territory of the West Philippine Sea, or again, the South China Sea, excuse me. And that his whole historic argument, just imagine if the Great Britain, who at one point was, the sun never sets on the British Empire, being the biggest commerce-based seagoing nation for the longest time. What if they used the same historic claims? Think about how much of the ocean they could claim using China's logic. It's just the ridiculousness of China's claims. So, the Ferdinand Marcos he's not. Defense Minister Teodoro is basically saying, I doubt that this is you. And basically, he seems like this is a waste of time. China's never going to follow anything that is of any relevance that's going to solve the ongoing tensions between China and the Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos, because he is trying to win the public relations battle, is going to proceed with the talks because even though he probably agrees with Teodoro, it is in the Philippines' best interest to continue to gather allies on its side as long as it attempts to negotiate in good faith, even despite what China might be viewing these as. So it's probably not going anywhere. It's unfortunate. There was a lot of hope that they could reach something, but the fact is, almost a year into negotiations, and China is basically just stalling out. And it comes quite the fact that they're stalling out means that they're not willing to give in on their claims, which are, again, contrary to international law. If they agree to international law, you go back to what they're doing in BRICS, trying to create and turn BRICS into an anti-Western type organization. So if they agree to these international law, that kind of goes contrary to their whole theory of what they're doing in BRICS, along with the Russians. So more to come on that. I have a paper coming out probably tomorrow that briefly discusses that parts of that, because the BRICS summit was ended this week. So the other part that went in there is that the U.S. Navy has been in the process of retiring its Ticonderoga class guided missile cruisers. They are going to be replaced by more Arleigh Burke Block 3s and the DDGX, which is a new destroyer line that's coming that hasn't been fully developed. Basically, the U.S. Navy is getting out of cruisers. And so these Ticonderoga class cruisers, as they're approaching 30 to 35 years of service, are being decommissioned. So the U.S. Announced that they were going to retire the Ticonderoga class guided missile cruiser, the USS Philippine Sea, CG-58, in 2025. Now, the Philippine Congressman Rufus Rodriguez from the southern Philippines, not sure what part, he did write U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson, requesting that the U.S. donate the cruiser to the Philippines as a demonstration of U.S. commitment to the Philippines' defense. Again, go back in there, the U.S. does have a defense treaty with the Philippines. dating back to 1951. I think it's the oldest active bilateral defense treaty in the world. And the U.S. has reaffirmed that treaty as the Philippines are dealing with the issues of China's aggression in the West Philippine Sea. So they're not asking for it to buy it, they're asking to donate it. So there's a couple of things that come up with this. Is the concerns is that the Philippines is a small nation, and do they have the resources, both money and facilities, to assume the maintenance cost of a 35-year-old cruiser? Now, the Philippines do have facilities that probably need some upgrading of Subic Bay. Subic Bay used to be a major naval port for the United States. So there is probably some facilities still available for the Philippines to handle a larger ship of this type. Again, this is a cruiser. This is not an aircraft carrier. But there are concerns about the Philippines' budget to be able to support a 35-year-old cruiser. It is, again, old. Its hull is old. Its engines are old. It's probably much of its electronics and other internals are probably old as well, and they need to be taken care of. Now, the trade-off is the U.S. Navy operates a blue water navy. They have to have these ships to be able to sail all over the world. The Philippines do not have a blue water navy. This is basically a regional navy that would operate within Philippines territorial waters, probably operate within probably within the EEZ, but that's going to stay close to the Philippines. It's not going to be sailing across the Pacific to sail or into the Indian Ocean on any significant way. So the wear and tear will drop significantly on the USS Philippine Sea if the Philippines were to take it. Of course, they would rename it to BRP something or other. So that does kind of go in the Philippines' favor in that they would not be using it to the extent that the U.S. Navy did. Now, there's a couple things that go wrong with this. Is obviously the Ticonderoga class is not the most advanced U.S. ships, but it is advanced, and it does have upgrades on it, and does have a sophisticated weapons available to it. So it's not like this is a old piece of equipment that's still 35 years old. It is upgraded on a regular basis, especially with the weapon systems and the electronics. And the detection systems and the sensors and all that. That has all been upgraded. Now, one of the issues that come up over the summer is as they go into interoperability issues or interoperability work with the Philippines, is the Philippines lack the security infrastructure to receive U.S. Intelligence feeds that are highly sensitive and to handle U.S. weapons. Because again, if the Philippines, any country that receives U.S. weapons, they have to be able to secure them to protect their secrets from potential adversaries. Not talking about rifles or helicopters or something like that, or basic helicopters. Talking about stuff like Tomahawk cruise missiles. Not saying that the Philippines would take on Tomahawk cruise missiles, but other more advanced missiles coming in that go through these that launch on the Navy's vertical launch system. So the idea is that the Philippines don't have the security infrastructure. Now, the U.S. recognizes this, and the Philippines recognize this. And Secretary of Defense Austin, did provide a $500 million grant to the Philippines for the purpose of updating some new joint bases that they signed agreements with the U.S. and the Philippines, but also to upgrade their security defense architecture so that they could start taking on U.S. weapons. And the $500 million grant is the first of one grant, and there will be others coming in the $500 million. they didn't want to give the Philippines too much money at one time, trying to spend it all at once. They wanted to say, okay, here's money, upgrade, upgrade, upgrade. More to come as they go along. So one of them is to update defense security architecture. Now, when would that be done? It's unclear, but they don't have that security architecture to take the weapon systems of the USS Philippine Sea. But if they upgrade the security architecture, the ship is not supposed to retire until 2025. If they decide to donate it to the Philippines, there's obviously some sensitive things that are U.S. specific and not shared with allies that would need to be removed from the USS Philippine Sea. And so it would probably be 2026 before it would be available if the U.S. decided to donate it. Could the security architecture in the Philippines be completed by the end of 2026? That's an open question. So even though they can't take these sophisticated U.S. weapon systems now, could they do it in the future? Also, how much work does the U.S. have to do to make the USS Philippine Sea export ready, and what's the cost of it? Again, the Philippines are not talking about buying it. They're asking the U.S. to donate it. And I think that the U.S. is somewhat open to it, but there are also concerns. There are legitimate security concerns that have to be addressed, not just about with the Philippines, but with they wouldn't even send this to Japan, who's a much closer ally as far as security architecture, because the U.S. has concerns over what's some of Japan's security infrastructure and how it matches up with AUKUS. So could the Philippines be ready, and could the U.S. spend enough money to upgrade the USS Philippine Sea to make it export ready? That's by the end of 2026. That's a big question. Now, the advantage is, obviously, there's the Typhoon missile system that uses it can launch the Tomahawk cruise missile. It can launch the multi-purpose air-to-surface or air-to-air missile from the U.S. Navy, and it can also launch, will eventually be able to launch the Mako hypersonic weapon when it's available. Now, the Typhoon missile system is deployed in the Philippines, and since it is an advanced weapon system, the Philippines do not actually man that. That is a U.S. Army manned weapon system. Well, the Typhoon, in this case, has 4 missile launchers. If I remember right, I think the Ticonderoga has 32 missile launchers. So this would be a huge upgrade for Philippines defense. The U.S. has already admitted that with all the Chinese missiles pointing into the region and its threats to the Philippines, providing a missile defense system or providing missiles to the Philippines would be a potential deterrent to Chinese actions against the Philippines. It would also provide if there was an invasion to Taiwan and the Chinese attack U.S. assets, and with the defense alliance between the Philippines and the United States, it could be a case where the Philippines could end up being involved in the war. And if the Philippines are given a former U.S. asset with 32 vertical launch systems, tubes in it, that could be of great use to the U.S. and the Philippines if they were given it. And it won't alter the regional power balance, but it will provide the Philippines with a significant capability to attack targets or to defend targets within the Philippines itself. So this does have a potential of the U.S. takes that they no longer have to maintain an older cruiser that cannot participate in the blue water Navy effectively or cost effectively, but it could operate in the territorial waters of the Philippines, where its usage would be much, much less. And if the U.S. just retires to Ticonderoga or the USS Philippine Sea and mothballs it, those are 32, I think it's 32 vertical launch systems that are taken out of the U.S. inventory. If they donate it, yes, it will still be taken out of the U.S. inventory, but it would have a potential to still provide support to the U.S. in the Western Pacific if, let's hope not, a war breaks out in the Western Pacific. So it is, looks like it's more in the U.S. interest to be able to provide the USS Philippine Sea to the Philippines. And it would be, in the case of Congressman Rodriguez, it would show or demonstrate the U.S. commitment to the Philippines' defense. And that is somewhat of concern in recent history, going all the way back to the Cold War, about how committed is the U.S. to defense of other countries. So no decision's going to be made. I don't, again, the USS Philippine Sea is not to be retired until 2025. So we probably won't see much into it. It will most likely be a decision that will be carried into the next administration, whoever it may be. I don't think it will be determined by Blinken and Lloyd Austin. I say Blinken because he's already said he's not sticking around either way. So it will be pushed off to the next administration. All right. So this is a two-part paper, When Whistling Past the Graveyard Meets the Gloomy Science. The gloomy science, of course, is economics. This is the part one of the paper. I was originally going to do this as a one big paper, but it was turning into something like that was 21 words long. And one thing I've learned on Substack, anything that's over 1,500 words tends to not get a lot of. There's some people that just don't want to get into a longer article. There are some people that do, but you get more views if you shorten the articles. So what I did is I just basically turned this into a two-parter. So the second part will be in next week's part, or the next week's broadcast here. It will be much more economic means of production type talk and applying academic theory to real world issues. And I'm an economist. It really does stand up when you start looking at what really makes and what goes into making something. In this case, we're warships. Now, this is no secret. The U.S. has definitely have a major problem in shipbuilding. We talked about risking the Eisenhower against the Houthis. The Ford-class carrier is taking in the area of 10 years to make. And they're making 2 at a time right now. I think that's all they can do. Obviously, as they get better at it, there's eventually supposed to be 10 Ford-class carriers made. It will take some time. It took a long time for it to get the 10 Nimitz-class carriers. That took quite a while as well. So it's not going to be it's actually a slightly slower timeline than building the Nimitz class. But this goes beyond aircraft carriers. Now, the U.S. has not been a major shipbuilding country for quite some time. This is not World War II and making Liberty ships. It is, U.S. does not make near as much. I think if I read tonnage of U.S. shipbuilding is 0.6% of the world's output of ships. China is by far the largest, followed by, I can't remember if it's Japan or South Korea is next. And then I think Finland is a big shipbuilder. A lot of cruise ships are built in Finland. And those are pretty heavy tonnage ships as well. So, This is no surprise. The U.S. Navy is behind, but the problem is getting worse. And there's several reasons behind it, and it's not money. The U.S. is throwing money in their defense budgets, ever increasing. Ships are getting more and more expensive. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But this paper is kind of the setup, the discussion of why the U.S. is behind on shipbuilding and why the situation, if left unattended, will get worse. But here's kind of some of the facts. The U.S. military, the Navy, is in retreat when compared to China ascendancy in Asia, and that's coming from the Australian-based Lowy Institute. They're not saying that China is. They said China actually, as far as its overall power, is flatlined, but it is actually increasing in its military power in Asia relative to other countries. In this case, the U.S. The U.S. Navy is now the second largest Navy in the world, and it is facing an imbalance now in the Western Pacific favoring China because the People's Liberation Army Navy, and along with the Chinese Coast Guard, which operates for the most part older People's Liberation Army Navy ships, are transferred to the Chinese Coast Guard. They take out the weapons and the vertical launchers, but they're basically still, they can be loaded if they have to be. So, the People's Liberation Army Navy and Chinese Coast Guard has 1,015 ships compared to the U.S. Navy's 364 of all types. So this obviously makes the Chinese Navy by far larger than the U.S. Navy. Now, again, China is the world's largest shipbuilding nation and has the industrial capacity to produce warships at a rate that the U.S. cannot meet. Now, in this paper that's coming out, it's actually available to paid subscribers. It will be available to everybody on Monday. It talks about some of the issues that go into the shipbuilding and being able to transfer labor. The U.S. does not have a large market for shipbuilding anymore, and so shipbuilding is specialized labor. When you make something more scarce, it becomes more expensive. So relative labor rates in the U.S. are higher for shipbuilding, and there is no replacement where you can't pull workers in from civilian shipbuilding into military shipbuilding because there is not that large pool of workers that have a similar skill set. China doesn't have that issue. Again, you have the largest shipbuilding in the world. They have plenty of labor that they can shift between the two. Not saying that they're building the best, but they can build more of them. Now, so the U.S. also they can't keep up with People's Liberation Army Navy shipbuilding, but the U.S. Navy is actually getting smaller. So while the People's Liberation Army is growing, the U.S. Navy is actually shrinking. And this is not expected to change until 2025 at the earliest. And I think it's pretty much a zero sum by 2025, depending how fast some of these if anybody can get ahead, or any of these companies can get ahead on production. So the outcome in the Western Pacific will depend on the ability of the U.S. Navy to address this. Now, there is something called Project 33. I wrote about it before, where the U.S. Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations is launched a project to bring more autonomous systems into the Western Pacific to address the issues with the deficit of ships and the slow production rates in the U.S. Why autonomous vehicles could serve to cover the gap is autonomous naval vehicles are not near as big. Traditional shipbuilders do not have to make them. So there's more opportunities to make autonomous vehicle or autonomous weapon systems, including ships, that you can't do with manned ships. So that's just the way the U.S. is trying to cover the gap. but the U.S. knows that they do have to have manned ships. So Project 33 is just a stopgap measure. Autonomous ships will be a part of the fleet now, and it will be more of an more so going forward. But it is not a replacement for manned ships. So the U.S. has to address the gap that they have in shipbuilding. So now, one thing that will go into the U.S. Navy's favor is it does maintain larger and more capable ships than the People's Liberation Army Navy and the Chinese Coast Guard. The U.S. has a displaced tonnage of 3.6 million U.S. short tons compared to China's 2 million. So China has almost 3 times as many ships as the U.S., but only almost half the tonnage. So obviously, you know that the Chinese have a lot more smaller ships. Smaller ships tend to not be able to be blue water Navy ships. U.S. Navy ships are all blue water Navy. The idea is that they can sail across the ocean on either deployments, or if they just normal patrols, the U.S. Navy can operate in what's called the blue water space. Most of the Chinese Navy cannot. Now, that may not matter much because the scenarios that they're talking about the U.S. Navy getting involved in the Western Pacific has the U.S. deploying to China. So all those Chinese ships that are less capable and cannot sail across the ocean, the U.S. Navy is coming to them. So those ships will be able to play a role in any type of conflict with the U.S. So if you don't have to worry about power projection, if China had to power project to the west coast of the U.S., they can't bring their 1,015 ships to bear. It would be a much, much smaller number. Where the U.S. will have to project its power all the way across. So the U.S. ships tend to be heavier, obviously. They tend to be more capable, carry more weapons. I think when you look at vertical launch systems, the U.S. has more than twice as many as the Chinese. The U.S. number, though, is shrinking as some of the older weapon systems are going to be taken offline. So the one of the things that's going to help with the vertical launch system is the U.S. is retiring the Ohio class. Some of the Ohio classes, which were ballistic missile submarines, a number of them were converted from ballistic missile submarines to guided missile submarines. So they have a number of vertical launch systems. A number of those, the ones they converted were the older submarines in the Ohio class. So some of those will be going offline, which again takes down the number of vertical launchers available to the United States. So the fact is the U.S. struggles to produce enough ships, and it faces constraints in shipbuilding. And it's, again, we talk a little bit about this where we talk about the factors of production. The economic factors of productions are land, labor, and capital. So, and entrepreneurship, if you want to get beyond the original classical version of economic theory. Now, throwing in a lot of economic theory, and you're going to hear an earful for next week. But when we go into shipbuilding, you look at the U.S. has something like 12,000 miles of coastline. That doesn't include river coastline. I think it does include the Great Lakes. 19,000 kilometers. Land is not an issue for the United States. They have plenty of coastal areas. The U.S. used to be a big producer of ships. They have a lot of those facilities still existing on coastlines or in rivers that have access to the ocean. So the U.S. does not, so land is not a concern for the U.S. As I stated earlier, money is not a factor for the U.S. They'll just keep on deficit spending their way into oblivion, but they are willing to, the U.S. is willing to spend the money on the higher cost of ships. Now, I talk about a little bit about the land, labor, and capital, about what that does for shipbuilding. Again, land is not an issue. Money is not an issue to an extent. So what the U.S. Congress is doing, and along with the Department of Defense, they're looking at what the bottlenecks are for U.S. shipbuilding. and they're trying to actively seek ways to fix it. This is not a new issue. This extends beyond the Biden administration, beyond the Trump administration. Of it should have started being addressed in both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, and it wasn't. So one of the gaps that happened with U.S. shipbuilding was after the Cold War ended, peace dividend. The U.S. Navy had a official force structure to have that 600 ship Navy. Well, when the Soviet Union went away, there wasn't, and this is legitimate, there was no need for a 600 ship Navy anymore. So they made the decision to start retiring ships. And more damaging was they chose to forego replacement ships. So what they did is, well, I have a bunch of older cruisers, or let's say destroyers. I have a bunch of older destroyers. Well, instead of replacing them when they get old, we'll just let them get old and they'll get replaced by some of the newer ships. So orders that would have been placed to support a 600 ship Navy were no longer placed. So that took away work out of the defense industry. And this is a well-known factor. This happened in aircraft manufacturing as well, armored vehicle manufacturing. When the Cold War ended, it was definitely belt tightening time for the defense sector. Understandable. They didn't need to have all this. You start seeing a lot more in the cases of, so you have future orders drying up. For example, the Seawolf was to replace the Los Angeles class submarines, especially the early versions. There was originally 29 Seawolf class submarines expected to be built. They only built 3, canceled 26. That meant they were going to extend the life of the Los Angeles classes, and what happened is shrink the number of attack submarines, the Los Angeles class attack submarines. You canceled orders for the replacement to the Los Angeles class. You retired a number of Los Angeles classes. So you reduce the number of shipbuilding. A company is not going to keep facilities open or maintain those facilities if they don't have the work for them. Even if they don't sell them, they're not going to maintain them. The other aspect is you saw in the defense industry, you saw a lot of mergers. And it used to be in the aircraft manufacturing, for example, it used to have, I know aircraft manufacturing better than I do ship manufacturing, but you used to have General Dynamics, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, and you could even say McDonnell and Douglas, North American, Grumman. Now you have for aircraft manufacturing, for the most part, it's both, and then you had Lockheed and Lockheed Martin, which turned in, and then Martin Aircraft, but that turned into Lockheed Martin. For the most part now, all you have, because of mergers, is you have Boeing and you have Lockheed. Now, they did buy a lot of the facilities of their competitors when they merged, but they also eliminated duplicate services. So they started shutting down defense manufacturing plants that they use as being duplicative. That's understandable because you don't want to get into a situation where you have all these fixed assets, you have no work, so you have to maintain these fixed assets. That costs money, and if you don't have the work, that means that you're, for a financial term, you're deleveraging your fixed costs because you don't have the work. So the work that you do have is the cost of your fixed costs become a higher percentage of your overall output as far as expenses go. So these are for-profit companies. They have shareholders. They have to start reducing to try to get their expenses in line. That meant shutting down facilities that they viewed as being duplicative or not having work. It also meant reducing the maintenance of existing facilities. Again, you didn't have the volume coming in, so you've reduced the number of facilities, and then the facilities you did, you stopped doing the maintenance on them. When you don't have work, because you don't have, you're not getting defense orders, you start laying off people. Now, the defense in the aircraft industry in the U.S. is you have a large civilian segment. You also have a space segment that has civilian applications. So you do not necessarily lose those workers. You lose some, but some transfer to other facilities. Also, the U.S. has a large, when it comes to aircraft, we provide a significant number of aircraft to foreign buyers. So the U.S. companies with the U.S. government approval can sell U.S. aircraft to foreign countries. You do not see U.S. ships being built for other countries. So that's not an option you saw in the naval defense and shipbuilding sectors. So when the labor was gone, because there's no military contracts, that labor was gone. They went to other jobs. It's not like they could go to the civilian sector because the U.S. doesn't make many ships. So these people just went to other sectors, or eventually they retired. So when you reduce the number of people, when you start trying to pick up shipbuilding like the U.S. is trying to do, and you don't have the labor to do it, then it becomes more expensive. That labor is, again, scarce. Scarcities cause things to be more expensive. And that's what you're seeing in the labor markets. So kind of go into the discussion of what is driving a lot of these bottlenecks in U.S. shipbuilding. So I kind of laid out some of the challenges. And so here's another example, without getting into economic theory. The Arleigh Burke class destroyer, which is not a new ship. We've been building Arleigh class for 20 years. We're even retiring some of the early Block 1 Arleigh Burkes and replacing them with Block 3s, and I think there's a Block 4 coming. It's a very strong hull to use for the Navy. So it's ones that they're replacing are just because of wear and tear, being at sea for 25 to 30 years. And they're just bringing on new. So it's not like the design is outdated. It's just that they've basically worn them out. But anyway, the Arleigh Burke has been around for a while. They've been building this ship for quite some time. They have a contract to build 10 new Arleigh Burkes between two companies. And between the two companies, it's going to take them, two companies, it's going to take them 7 years to build 10 ships. This is not a new ship. This is a existing ship, and that at that rate of production shows you that even when these are relatively small destroyers, they're relatively small. They're not small ships, but they're relatively small. So that's when compared to an aircraft carrier, and something that doesn't require new technologies or manufacturing techniques to build. The U.S. has got to the point of this ship taking to build at less than something like 1.5 new ships a year. They want to get it up to 2 to 3 ships per year total for the Arleigh Burkes. But right now they can't get there. They don't have the people, they don't have the resources, they don't have the facilities. And what facilities they do have, they're more expensive. Because again, if you're not maintaining through supporting your infrastructure and putting the maintenance into your infrastructure, that infrastructure needs maintenance. That normally, if it had been replaced or updated on a timely basis, you wouldn't have to spend so much money on repair and maintenance. So the maintenance cost is going up on U.S. manufacturing facilities because they didn't have the money to justify the increased fixed costs, or what they would have to they would have to invest in their fixed facilities. They couldn't justify when you looked at their profit margins. So they just decided, all right, so they can only build, I think it's 1.2 to 1.3. They want to get to 1.5. They eventually want to get 2 to 3 a year. That's on a new ship. The replacement for the Ohio class, the ballistic missile submarine that's been around since the 80s, its replacement takes 7 years to build. And not only 7 years to build, once they decided when they award the contract in 2021, it still took them 3 years to start construction. The replacement, it's the Columbia class. There's only one being built, and it takes 7 years to build it. They're hoping to get it down to 6 years to build a submarine, and they're only building one right now. And maybe they're trying to expand the facilities, but again, that will increase the cost because they have to pay for that. That will probably, the private industry will pay for that facility upgrade, adding more capacity. Probably most likely they're just updating an existing facility to make it ready to produce submarines. But that's the idea. It's taking a long time. And then the Ford aircraft carrier, that was, it was procured, which means it was put in the budget in 2007. It was commissioned in 2017. So it took almost 10 years to get it to the point of commissioning. And it didn't finish its sea trials, or not sea trials, I'm sorry. It finished its first deployment this year, and it apparently was a success. I think there's still some teething issues. But it was a relative success. But it was commissioned in 2017 and just finished its first tour in 2024. It will definitely get faster. And in this case, they're building two Ford classes right now. So it's not like the Columbia class where they're only building one, it's two. So this tells you the anemic position of U.S. shipbuilding in the naval space. And obviously, it is driving up the relative cost of building these ships. But again, cost is not an issue. The Navy's, U.S. is willing to pay for it, at least to an extent. But the bigger issue right now is not the cost, it's the lack of production ability. Again, this is a significant issue. The Cold War caused an issue with this, but also I think I need to mention this, is the war on terror also created an issue. Building aircraft carriers was not the biggest issue when you're worrying about how you're going to deploy your Army and Marines on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. Big ticket items like stealth fighters and a new frigate is not going to be at the top priority of your defense budget. So that's another thing that caused a gap to kind of stretch out the existing ships in the naval fleet. And this didn't impact just the naval fleet. This impacted the all the way across. You look at U.S. nuclear forces trying to update. You're going to have the B-52 by the time it's done. It's probably going to be flown almost 100 years. So the war on terror also caused a pretty significant impact that these big ticket projects were basically delayed, and we're paying the cost of it now. And the longer they delayed and not giving the orders, that made the maintenance issues in the fixed facilities used for production to either go into further disrepair or to be sold altogether through the fact that it was a duplicate service. So it is a significant issue. I go into more depth. The point of this first paper is talk about what the relative positions of both navies are and some of the challenges of the number of ships that the U.S. can build. And it's a significant constraint. Project 33 might be able to close some of the gaps as far as capabilities, but it will not replace the actual production levels. And it is a serious concern. Warfare is unfortunately a very intensive, it uses a lot of material, so obviously it's a very intensive type of call it activity of man, of modern society, and the U.S. is way behind on that. And so talk more about it next week. The paper, if you're a paid subscriber, you can get the paper now. If you're not, it will be available on Monday. So we'll talk about it more next week. So again, this was kind of give you the teaser, sitting there, say this is uh, some of the issues that they're running into, kind of why we're going into it. I go into the why a little bit more in depth on the second paper. Again, it's not enough to go in there and be a economic study. It's just to really kind of give you a more in-depth idea of what's impacting U.S. shipbuilding and applying economic, call it, call it theory, call it applying economic theory to a real world event and see how well it holds up. And I think it holds up pretty well. Again, the economic theory is pretty wide open, so it's fairly easy to apply how it looks into basically everything that we do in life. And so, again, I'm an economist. I'm favored towards it, but really it does. The basic factors do really apply in making the goods and services in this country. So that is it. Those are the three papers this week. I feel like I'm leaving the shipbuilding one hanging. It would have been nice the way it worked out if I could have put it in to one paper, but then this podcast would have been heavy into economic theory. So I thought, no, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I need to split it so that it goes on as being a topic over 2 weeks. Otherwise, it could be blindingly boring for a lot of people. So I didn't want to do that because you could see me. It's a long paper. I could easily see it being a 2-hour podcast and hour and a half of it being about economic theory. So I did not want to do that to everybody. So that is it for this week. It has been, I grew some subscribers. Followers are definitely growing faster than subscribers. I think I've been talking to another Substacker, and they have graciously offered me opinions about things that I could do to improve my style. And it's very generous because they are not asking for anything in return. So they're giving me some really good advice. One of the things I am considering that they brought up is, and it's kind of been on my mind, is that I do send out so much content. And the idea is I want to be able to provide, and I've said this before, I want to be able to provide however you want to assume or consume my media. Do you want to read it? Do you want to see it in video form? Do you want to see it in have me read it, not AI, have me read it? So an audio version. So I'm trying to provide all this. And then I also give Substack. There's nothing, I've said this last week and previous weeks, there is no exclusivity in any other platform of my content. Substack is where everything is found. So if I'm going to post something on YouTube, which is actually really bad right now, and Rumble and Locals, it is everything that I post on those are found on Substack because there's no exclusivity except on Substack. So I do these sample versions because these short little videos work well on Shorts and YouTube. And so I've been creating those. So I'm going back and considering, do I need to do the audio sample, which is a 1-minute file, and do I need to do the video samples, which are 1-minute files? I do a total of 3 per paper that I write of those. Now, the idea is that if I've asked people, and I've gotten some feedback where they do like those sample files, and the sample files used to do really well on YouTube. And the idea is I want to get people to listen on YouTube and have them come over to Substack. Has not really happened. Give you an example of what's happened on YouTube. I don't know if it's tied in with the U.S. elections and then them trying to tighten down on disinformation. I don't know if that's it, or if they're just focusing more on people that will bring creators that will bring them more profit and more views. I used to get on the West Philippine Sea newsletter videos, the shorts. I could get up to, I think I got up to 4,000 views. It might have actually been more. especially during Bella Catan exercise, and the videos were doing over 1,000. Not all of them, but they were getting over 1,000. But the shorts were doing really well, both on the audio short and the video shorts. And I was getting a lot of views. Those now I've gone from 25, we call it an average of 2,500 during Bella Catan, all the way down. And it's been slowly dropping, but it would typically I could still hit in the 500 to 1,000 on the West Philippine Sea newsletter. It's by far the most popular thing that I posted on YouTube. And now I think the last I looked at it, it had 12. My content hasn't changed that much. The Philippines have not been cut off from YouTube. So it's, I even had a couple of users on YouTube talk about how badly suppressed my activities are. Rumble is a much smaller site than YouTube, and my views on Rumble are of magnitudes greater than YouTube. But for the most part, Rumble doesn't really have shorts, neither does local. So I'm trying to determine if I'm going to continue to doing those audio samples, but a number of people have said they'd like the samples. So the suggestion coming from this very gracious Substacker, I don't want to say their name because I haven't got their permission, but it gave me some very pointed tips, good tips. And I've thought about this before, is every time I send out one of these files, I'm loading up the subscribers' mailboxes. They're getting more information, and maybe it's just overloading their mailboxes. I know because I was subscribed to a lot of people, my mailbox is just outrageous with the amount. So the idea is to do basically embedded emails. So what happens is instead of sending out, let's say for a file, let's say for one article, I'm going to send out the article, I'm going to send out a video summary, a video sample of that summary, and an audio sample. And then the next day I will send out the full audio version, the full video version, and a video sample of that full version. So you're talking about 7 files that are going out. So 7 different emails. So the suggestion they made is start embedding those files into what I send out. So instead of getting 7 emails, you might only get 2, or you might get 1, depending how much I embed it. And then basically you go into this one email and you have all your, however you want to consume my media, all right there. Now, I'm thinking if I went down, I've dropped the video samples and the audio samples. Now, a couple things that come up into that with issues with that I've run into is because I do put my stuff on Spotify and Apple and YouTube, and I think Google has some type of podcasting service. It all feeds over to the RSS feeds on those. If I embed the emails, I lose the RSS feeds. So that means I have to create a separate email or a separate file to keep the RSS feed connected so that my subscribers or listeners on these other podcast services can still receive my content. The RSS feed's done through Substack, and it feeds it over to these 4 other video services. If I embed, I lose the RSS feed. Now, the RSS feed only goes to audio and video files, and the video files, it just separates out the audio portion of the video and provides it to the podcast audience. If you embed, you lose it. So what I have to do is I have to create another email or another post, take everybody where it doesn't email anybody, and it just, then at that point it feeds the audio feed, or the RSS feeds go across as normal. My users would not get any type of, or my subscribers wouldn't get any emails when I do that. They would just pop up into those various podcast services. And then my subscribers would get 1 or 2 emails, depending how I split it up so again, instead of getting 7, you get 2 or you get 1. So the other question I got to look into, and I think I think people would be appreciative of that and not get so many emails from me. And I understand that. The other issue I run into is the algorithm of Substack. I did a test file that it did pretty well. I embedded a video and I did a short article, and it hit about 100 views, which is really good. It was a subject that seemed to click with a lot of people. If I sent that out separately, so typically when I did a file like that, if I did the short article and I did the video, I would get about 120 to 140. So I get between 50 to call it 50 to 70 views for each file. In this case, instead of getting 50 to 70, I got 100. But that's still 20 less views than I would have gotten if I sent them out separate. Now, what does that do to the algorithm with Substack, where all of a sudden if I did decide to reduce my views by 20%, would that push me down algorithmically in the Substack algorithms? I don't know the answer to that. But anyway, if you're a listener and you know, please feel free to contact me on this. I think it would be a service to my subscribers if we could cut down on the number of emails. I'm just concerned if it will algorithmically hurt me to do so. And I think it would be the subscribers would probably appreciate not receiving so many, because I'm at the rate right now, what I do is I'm still growing, but I grow at a rate of, for every 5 subscribers I get, I lose 3. And I don't know exactly why I'm losing it. Is it people that they follow you, hoping that they'll subscribe to you, hoping that you subscribe back, and then they drop you so that they can keep their subscription numbers up, but not get crowded in the email box? Or as the case is, they don't like my content. Hey, that's fair. Not for everybody. It can be pretty dry. I get it. Not concerned with that. Or is it a case that they just get too many emails from me, so they subscribe to me, and then they follow me, and then they drop the subscription and stay on following with me? Because even though my rate of growth in subscribers is, for every 5 I get, I lose 3, you're seeing the followers pretty much continue to go up. So it looks like it's, for the most part, people are trying to avoid subscribing because they don't want to get bogged down in the email box. But also when you look at the views that come out of it, most of them come through emails and not through, so that means most of my views are coming from subscribers, not from followers. Now you can be a follower and a subscriber at the same time as well. So it's, some of the questions I have about the algorithmic functions and how I want to do it, because I do want to service the audience. I want to be able to provide the media in however they like to consume it. But if I could do it in such a way that I'm not bogging down my subscribers with way too many emails, which I think I probably am. But do I have to do that to keep the algorithmic growth rates? That's the question. So there's probably going to be some changes that I'm going to do. I still have to decide how I'm going to do it. I also want to, if I get more paid subscribers, I want to do things to help them out. In this case, this week, is I gave them an early preview of a paper. Now, for all you people that are not paid subscribers, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. But if you're not to worry. The paper that comes out that the paid subscribers got an early preview to, they got an early preview starting last night. It will be available Monday morning. It will be the exact same paper that the paid subscribers are seeing today. They just got to see it 3.5 days earlier. So it will be shared with everybody. So that is it. I talked a lot about the algorithmic functions and ideas. If you have any thoughts on this, please feel free to tell me. That would be great. I appreciate any feedback. It's always good to talk to people on Substack, because you run into cases where they're, it's not like the drama of YouTube or sometimes X. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. If you're a new subscriber, thank you for joining in. For all my existing subscribers and followers, thank you. I really appreciate your support, and I hope all of you have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you.